vamos a empezar a hablar sobre todos los elementos que forman parte del proceso de trabajo. Y para eso vamos a tomar el ejemplo de una costurera.
In this talk, we are going to start analyzing the elements that form parts of a labor process. And for that, we are going to take the example of a seamstress. When the seamstress is preparing to make shirts, for example, what does she need to work? We know she needs the cloth. Without cloth, she cannot make the shirt. But she also needs the scissors to cut, needs buttons, thread, a sewing machine, needs light to be able to see, be it daylight or artificial light. She needs, if it gets too hot, some way of cooling the surrounding, and if it is too cold, heating it. These are all elements that are part of the labor process. But we have to ask ourselves if all these elements play the same role, and we are going to realize that they do not. For example, the thread or clothes are elements that are part of the finished product, the shirt. The shirt is composed of fabric, thread, buttons, and all these elements are part of the shirt. There are other elements, on the other hand, that are needed to make the shirt, but they are not part of the shirt itself. As it is the sewing machine, the shirt is one thing and the machine is another. Then we must distinguish between elements that are transformed during the labor process and tools that can help to make this transformation. And there are other elements that creates the conditions to be able to work. Then here are some definitions which I think are important that we write down and memorize because, among other things, scientific knowledge needs certain words that embody ideas. They save us the use of many words to give account of a single reality. We will call raw material the object that undergoes transformation through the labor process to become the final product. For example, the fabric is an object that is transformed, becoming part of the final product, the shirt. If I use the term raw material, it saves me from saying the object that undergoes transformation to become the final product. In the case of the shirt, what would the raw material be? Raw material would be the fabric, the thread, the zipper. And what about the needle? The needle does not form part of the final product. It is an instrument, a tiny instrument. A bigger instrument would be the sewing machine. But there are other raw materials that are consumed as energy, for example, electricity or coal. There are then various kinds of raw materials. The main raw material that actually are part of the product and the secondary raw material that are consumed but which are not part of the product. Now, this main raw material can have a different origin. Leather is a raw material, of course, to make shoes, right? But where does the leather come from? The raw material can have a different source, natural or artificial source. For example, the plastic that is used today for making shoes is a synthetic material. Then there are the raw materials that come from nature. And there are raw materials that come from the discovery of chemistry. New inventions are producing new raw material, aren't they? Now, we must not confuse this raw material that comes from nature with what is called the primary material. What primary material is? By primary material, we are thinking about the copper in the mine, the oil in the ground, the skin of the animals that is alive, wealth that has not received any work on it. A primary material is transformed into raw material when the worker makes an effort to extract the oil, the copper, any mineral, or when it comes from an animal, the work of nurturing, killing it, and getting the leather. Raw material is everything that, coming from nature or from artificial manufacturing, has been transformed by human work. So we now have the definition of raw material and primary material. And we have the distinction between main raw material and secondary raw material. Another thing that we must consider is that the same element can have various functions. It can be raw material in a labor process and product in another. Specifically, the cloth is raw material on the shirt, but is the product of a loom when raw material is cotton. The sewing machine is an instrument in the process of the seamstress, but is also a product in a sewing machine factory. This is very important. Marx insisted very much on the fact that it is the relationship in which things are that determine the characteristics of that particular item. That is to say, the function of an element changed depending on the place it occupies in the labor process. Now, the raw material, the instrument of labor, the building, the place where cars are parked, all of them are the physical conditions needed to produce. And that is why we call them the means of production. We may have very sophisticated means of production, but if there is no one to make them produce, then that sophisticated means of production will produce no wealth. Therefore, labor is crucial for producing wealth. We have then new definitions. We will call means of labor all the things that human beings use directly or indirectly to transform the raw material into the final product. And we will call means of production to all the material objects that are involved in the labor process. The raw material and the means of labor are the means of production. We are going to see soon all the elements that form part of the labor process. What elements are needed to work in a shoe industry? We need leather or plastic to make the footwear. We need the machines that are going to sew the shoes. We need the building where workers are installed. The lighting is required. There is a need of heat if it is very low, the temperature. There is a need for a place where the truck comes to get the shoes. There is a need for the shoe boxes. All these elements are called means of production. Now, you may be asking, why so much details, right? Why all these definitions? We are going to see that this definition and these details are very important to begin to understand why a small group of rich people and a vast majority of poor people exist in the world's production systems.